there will be no real non-controlled currency in the world.
We're coming for you, banks.
Increasing the block size to 32 megabytes right now. What would be the top 5 arguments that would get hurled against me?
Oh, that's a good one.
There are a few that the big blockers got right.
Ching, like all these coins splash into the wallets of all the winners. I love that.
There's a new threat out there. It's crypto.
Hello and welcome back to the Bitcoin Cash podcast, following Bitcoin Cash on its rise to global reserve currency. This is episode number 128, BCH and XEC, featuring Amaury Séchet. Today is Saturday, the 14th of September, 2024. I'm your host, Jeremy. Jett is doing the producing. Same as always, 2 quick announcements, same as we've had on the previous episode. Our FundMe.Cash campaign is still running. We've got 75% done. We need 25% more, 8 more BCH. So you can go to FundMe.Cash and get involved in that. There's actually other people also running campaigns, which I highly recommend you check out. So good to see community crowdfunding going on there. And the listener survey is still running. You can go to bitcoincashpodcast.com/survey and fill out the survey to have your input and find out what the community is thinking. All right, let's get straight into it. Our guest today, long promised on the show, actually in episode 85, we talked about, oh yeah, maybe one day we'll have Amaury on the show. But here we are. Our guest, Amaury Séchet, is an engineer, the former BCH Benevolent dictator. I'm keen to ask about that. And the eCash XEC lead dev. Welcome to the show, Amaury. How'd you get into Bitcoin?
Right away. So I got into Bitcoin, slowly, not directly into Bitcoin. I got into the whole cypherpunk, like using technology for, to improve liability and stuff like that. And in that whole movement, digital cash was essentially the missing pieces for a very long time. And so, I was following what was going on there for a while. Actually, when Bitcoin came out, I did not immediately take it seriously, like most people there. Because one thing that people don't realize is that at the time it was happening on a regular basis, like maybe a couple of times a month or whatever, that someone was like, oh, I finally cracked digital cash, and here is what are you going to do? So, like the first few you check, and then at some point you're like, oh, like this is, this is it. Here we go again, right? And so I did not really pay attention. I didn't really dismiss it either, right? I just didn't really pay attention to it. It's like, okay, one more, right? But then in 2010, late 2010, I read an article by Belgian guy called Plume, and he was talking about Bitcoin. I was like, oh, that's funny, because it's like this thing is coming back through another angle, and I cannot forgot about it by then, didn't really pay attention. I was like, all right, like this thing, it seems to be like, a year and a half, 2 years later, someone is still talking about it. So maybe there is something there. And at this point, this is where I started to look at how it works. And, then, you're like, okay, it seems like this could actually work. And for me, the big reveal moment was the Cyprus crisis in 2012. Because, so for people that are not aware, there was a banking crisis in Cyprus, and, many people could not access their bank account there and so on. And this led many people to invest into Bitcoin at the time. The general story in the media was like people from Cyprus were using Bitcoin instead of the bank because they could not access their money anymore. So it was probably not people from Cyprus, really. There was more people like me being like, okay, this is happening in Cyprus, and, maybe it can happen to me next, right? And so I saw at the time a lot of people get into Bitcoin. And for me, that was the signal that, there is a technological solution, but also people see value there. And there was a strong indicator that it would eventually get pretty big.
Yeah, that whole Cyprus thing was super interesting because then there was also the Neo and B incident. I don't know if you remember that one, where the guy started like a new bank. It was called Neo and B. It looked really flash. It was like one of the earlier scams. The guy's name was Danny something, and he made these.
I don't remember that one.
Oh, it was an absolute classic. And he made like a black and yellow ads, like who is Neo? And he ran them on the island, and it was big on our Bitcoin. Everybody was going crazy. Like, this is it. We're going to take over like BlackRock in, 2 weeks or whatever. and he made like an actual church thing. I would have to find this image. It's so cool. It looked like a cathedral, and he had the Bitcoin like logo in it, but all lit up with like neon lighting and everything. And that photo was just getting everybody so hyped that we were all going to, make millions on Bitcoin. And then people were trading the stocks. This was before ICOs, before anything. Stocks in this company on this other shady exchange called Haverstock or something like that, where you could obviously put in your Bitcoin and then trade the stocks. I made some money on it, and then I got my Bitcoin out, and then they shut down the thing and run
right in time
to everyone else. But that's what I remember from the Cyprus crash. There was genuinely some people in Cyprus using Bitcoin, though. It wasn't all just international speculators, right?
No, but like obviously they must have been, but at the same time, we saw the price, do like 5x or something like that in a matter of days. It was not all people from Cyprus, but it was all people looking at, like maybe the banking system is not where, maybe I want to have a plan B effectively, right? Like this thing, it works mostly, but sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, it's really bad, right? So I want to have some other options.
And so from your point of view there then, at that time, what did you think? Because we've talked on the show many times with a lot of different guests, especially people who were from the old days like that. What did you expect was going to happen with Bitcoin, right? We're here a decade later. We have some sense of how it all played out. Does it match your expectation or not?
Something did not. Up to, I don't know, like 2014 or so, pretty much what I expected. After that, there was like the big move for small block, which to me like still don't make a lot of sense to this day. Based on that, I make the series of prediction, like if we were keeping blocks small, here is like what's gonna happen, and pretty much all of it did happen. It's a bit surprised me that people would want that. At the same time, I've seen the big blocker side, and I also understand why people would be skeptical. So yeah, the whole stuff was, I don't know. I didn't really have the prediction, but it was a bit disappointing how it panned out after, say, 2016, 2017.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me too, I've always found it quite interesting that there was a long period of time, I think, in the BCH community or in the big block sort of a remnant or side after the split, where a lot of the people heavily involved couldn't really see the problems with it. And that's true of any, political movement or technology or anything. But I was fascinated. At that time, I wasn't as directly involved myself, but I think a lot of the people who were, because they had those blind spots, they were like, it's not working, but they didn't know why. And then any outside criticism.
But it's worse than that. They were refusing to acknowledge why, right? Like the approach was very ideological in nature and bound to fail pretty much.
So in what way? Like, where do you think? Because the ideology also kept it alive, right? So there is an upside to having people who are just so overwhelmingly like zealous, basically. But it cuts both ways, right? If BCH hadn't been as ideological as it was, maybe it wouldn't have lasted at all, right?
I don't think so, right? Because so you had like a big block movement that predates BCH quite a bit, right? And this whole movement is littered with, completely bunkered snafus, right? With people doing stuff that makes no sense whatsoever. And those people like essentially presented themselves to the market as untrustworthy, right? And when I got involved originally, I wanted to help those projects, to make them more sturdy, more solid, better, more credible alternatives so that we could activate bigger blocks on BTC. But quickly enough, I realized that those people, they were not interested at all, right? Because they were doing things in a certain way because they were like ideologically convinced that this is the way it should be, regardless of if it makes sense or not. And they were not even in agreement with each other, which led to forks in testnet, when people were testing the activation of larger block, which was that was a complete catastrophe, right? Because you have those guys and they present a project, but then you have a test activation and there is a fork in testnet because of it. Like miners are going to be like, okay, if we go with those guys, we're at risk at losing millions, mining the wrong chain, being on the wrong side of the fork or whatever. So just right there, you are telling people, which at the time were sympathetic to the cause, right? Like they were asking nothing more than a serious option. But you're telling them, okay, you need to support us. This is the best option. But by the way, by doing so, you're risking millions of dollars, right? Like it's just not a good deal from this perspective, right? Like they're never going to buy it.
Yeah. And that kind of credibility ended up being a huge pivotal issue. I mean, I think we're still seeing ramifications of that today. Like it was a couple months ago that Vitalik wrote a blog post explaining about how he'd read The Block Size War and hijacking Bitcoin and giving his thoughts. And I was a little surprised that he wasn't a little more favorable to the hijacking Bitcoin retelling. But what he did focus on was saying like, look, basically the credibility of the big block development team, such as it was very low. And firstly, they didn't really understand.
And for big reasons.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing that the big blocker really, like in the big block side, people are like, oh, like this and that forum were censored and whatnot. And, like to some extent that's true, but I mean, you get to look inward as well, right? Like they were pretty bad strategic problem and technological problem on the big block side.
Okay, so
and this is why, it leads to people like Craig Wright. They come in and they're like, well, we need to like completely remove all the limits and do it like in a nonsensical way and whatever, right? And a lot of people buy that because nobody told them, hey, look, like we can do that, but you need to, do it in a way that makes sense. Like you need to respect the engineering side of it, or it's not going to work. At the same time, you had the whole BU crowd that were all about emergent consensus at the time, and it's quite funny. Like they were very pushy about it. They even caused various negotiations to activate Big Block to fail because of it. Because they were like, this is collusion. We cannot agree on something. This is collusion. We need to use emergent consensus. Like this one to me is so incredible that it haven't happened. Like this is such a stupid move. Like you got like all the actors on the table being like, okay, how are we gonna activate this thing? We all want it. So, what do we do? And they arrived and they were late, right? So everybody was talking about activating the thing and what are the right parameters and whatnot. And they arrived late at the party and they're like, no, we cannot do any of that shit because it's collusion and we need to use emergent consensus. So, I mean, like this is bonkers. There is even like an economic research paper on emergent consensus because it was such a big topic at the time that showed that it's just like the economic isn't sound. It just doesn't work. And yeah, you had like a series of factions this way that were just set in their stuff and it was not working. And after the fork, they did not, at no point they were like, okay, I guess we were wrong. This is no, it should happen. But like to the contrary, everybody doubled down.
Yeah, that's classic human psychology, right? Like,
yeah, but that leads to what we are seeing today, where BCH have quite dramatically underperformed. I would say BTC with better fundamentals, right? Like there are just like so many examples. The cash token one is also another one, like for ages, some people were like, we need to have consensus validated tokens. And, if we look at it objectively, the main achievement of the cash token release was to destroy the SLP ecosystem, right? Like that was the number one achievement, and it's not a good one.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get into this then. No. Well, I don't know that I agree with that, but let's chat in a second. Let's just quickly. We've got to touch on the price because you bring that up as being like a metric of success, maybe, right? So BCH today, USD $328.79 for 100 megasats. I put down, but that's actually up significantly from last week. One BTC sat is only buys 182.6 BCH sats. So here we are 7, 8 years later, and we can see, 1 to 182 ratios. Definitely not what anybody would have been dreaming of. 1E buys 700.
No, and when I said, because at the time I was saying the same thing I'm telling you today, right?
Yeah.
And at the time we were like hovering around 10% of BTC.
Yes. Okay. All right. So let's take that as the baseline then, right? So it's roughly what, an order of magnitude, maybe in a magnitude and a half, kind of down from there. So XEC today is ranked 95 at $31.96. It's split by a million, but that's the equivalent price. So one BCH sat buys 10.2 XEC sats. So just tell me on the market side of it, how heavily do you weigh that in each of those two cases? And do you think that if maybe the technology has improved or the outlook is good going forward, that the reversal in the market is likely? Or do you think maybe just the network effect is going to run away with it? What's the story here with the tech versus the price?
I mean, it's not just the tech. The tech is part of it, but I would say, like brand recognition and network effect and stuff like that actually matter more than the tech. This is why I'm biased toward talking about technical point because I'm an engineer, but I also mentioned like strategic issues, stuff like Segwit 2x and whatnot, where like big strategic issue or the issue I have with emergent consensus is actually not technical, like it's economically, it doesn't work. All of that is going to cause the brand recognition to be eroded, right, over time. And so you're going to see the slide in price that goes with it.
So do you feel like that was kind of inevitable once the branding was sort of seeded, right? And BCH ended up, like, for instance, now we have the green logo, and you are actually a big fan of the orange with the cash wings, if I remember rightly. Is that... that accurate? And is that for that same reason that you think the branding is much better to sort of contest more directly?
I think it doesn't really matter whether it's like the green logo or the orange one or whatever. But the thing is, like, it was launched with an orange logo. It was launched with the ticker BCC and, like a few stuff like that. And really like the first thing that people did, instead of being like, okay, now we have our big block fork, let's try to build an ecosystem and whatnot. The first thing people did is like, well, no, it should be green instead of orange, and it should be BCH instead of BCC, and all kind of bickering like that had no value to anyone. And like worse than that, it creates a lot of brand confusion. So all of that is really, really negative, and the fact that this is where people went first is a bit of a red flag already, I would say.
I mean, because I'm just taking this as one example, I think it's quite an interesting case because to my knowledge, the green BCH has only in the last few years become more popular. Like even at the time when I started this podcast, which was the start of January 2021, I had it in my mind that I thought the green was better after thinking over it for quite a while. And so that's why I branded everything on this show with that green to try and really push that. And now it seems to have become more common. And I also like the lighter green. There's also the slightly darker green. So there was before that even just like different shades. And you say, okay, maybe that's a trivial thing and maybe people are distracted fighting over those wrong elements, but or the ticker symbol, kind of the same, right? But I feel like maybe it's just an evolutionary process. Maybe the big block side went through such a traumatic experience with the whole block size war and then the resulting contention afterwards, that a project needs to find its feet. And so BCH had a bit of a rebirth in that sense. You don't agree with that?
Maybe not. I think, the thing is the part of the community where those stuff came from, it came coming from there to change everything that was working into dysfunctional stuff. So,
yes.
And the sad part is that when we went away with XEC, because it was essentially becoming hell for us, it was completely unmanageable. Most of those people went away as well. At the beginning, were like, finally they are gone, but they could not keep the thing going, right? Like there are a few people that stayed. Notably, like Kalin is like essentially like the whole ecosystem, depends on Kalin now, right? Like everybody else that was technically competent went away.
Yes. Okay. All right. I mean, I might disagree on that too, but I think this is an interesting framing because it's true that in each of the splits, I would say first with BTC, you had the turnover with like Gavin and Mike and so forth. Like they could have been on the big block side, but Mike just was out of there. Gavin kind of faded out of his.
Yeah, but there is a reason for that, right? The BCH ecosystem has a big problem recognizing talent. And that makes the life of everybody talented in that ecosystem extremely difficult, right? Because let's imagine, okay, you have that podcast and you're running it and, you're somewhat competent with doing that. You know what you're doing and all of that. No, I'm telling you, okay, no, but you know what, like your podcast, it's great. I love it. I'm going to fund it, but it's probably not decentralized enough. So you know what, we're going to put like 5 other guys in the studio and I'm going to fund them as much as I fund you. And you're all going to run the podcast at the same time. And like, what's going to happen, right? The podcast is going to be complete horse shit.
Yes.
And you can be Joe Rogan and the podcast will still be complete horse shit, right? Like you can be, like Oprah Winfrey or whatever. You're like one of the best hosts ever, the best of the best. You still cannot make it work. And outside of that, like what's going to happen is like those 5 other guys know, like they don't do very much, right? But not they have your audience and it's all great for them, right? So, and they don't need to be particularly competent. But your life is hell now because your podcast is crumbling, and you have to keep it afloat somehow. But you like don't really have the levers that you need to make it work because like those 5 guys together, they have 5 times the funding that you do, right? Effectively, right? So they're gonna promote like things that have no coherence with what you want to do or whatever, right? And you're going to leave, right? And anyone competent in that ecosystem is going to leave. And you're going to end up with those 5 guys that are not so competent and that are going to run the show. Then, little by little, it's going to dwindle because people are going to stop watching it.
Yeah, so for listeners who maybe are lacking the context here, this analogy that you're drawing is to when you were leading the development at BCH ABC, right? And you were worried about there wasn't enough funding, and then there was funding given, I guess, right, to a variety of node implementations.
We were the worst funded team in BCH, maybe like except like very small nodes, but like amongst the big one, we were the worst funded during the whole thing.
But do you think that has, like, is there any responsibility on your part about that? Or is it just, okay, like it just was the worst funded because of malicious bad actors or something, right? There has to be, if you were...
It's not a malicious bad actor. It's just people are retarded.
Well, that's not really an explanation. Like, people have money. They will put their money where it makes sense to them, right? They might make a poor choice in your view, but in their view, it was the right choice, right?
Well, sure, it costed them billions of dollars, right? Like, but sure.
Well, that's a counterfactual, right? We don't know that necessarily. or do we? How do you arrive at the conclusion that BCH needed or like missed out on billions of dollars?
Well, just because it was hovering, between like 2 and 4 on CMC for like years, and once we got the fucked out, it went up to like, I don't know, like 15 or 20 or something like that. And the split with BSV was also not as much, but very costly as well.
Yes.
And all those efforts, they were funded. Like people put millions behind BSV, people put millions behind like all the other effort to replace us, right? Like people spent good money to make that happen, and the result is disastrous, right? Like because if BCH just have cruised along, let me look at CMC, right?
So right now we're number 16. We've been in the range 14 to 20 for the last few months, right? But it went from, like you said, from number 2 down to, at the lowest, I know it was number 31, which was, I don't know, maybe mid 2022, something like that. And since then, like after the CoinFlex disaster, and since then it's been kind of back on the rise. So I hear what you're saying. It's true that the splits were disastrous, right? There was all kinds of money spent. There was all kinds of arguing. There's lots of fracturing.
But those splits, they were not just disastrous out of the void, right? Like they were funded. They were very good money behind those splits by people that was, who were convinced that those were, good ideas, right? Like, so if we look, give or takes, where BCH used to over there for like 5 years or something. So, it's not like,
well, which 5 years? Let's be specific here. Like, so from 2017,
like the first 4 or 5 years, something like that. It was, always hovering between like 3-4 typically, right? So right now,
hang on. That's not right, because 4 years is from 2017 to 2021, and I started this show in January of 2021 when BCH was ranked 9. So it was already significantly declined by that point.
Okay, when did the XEC fork happen? I'm pretty bad with dates.
It was November 2020.
2020,
yes.
Right. Okay, so 3 years. Let's put like the three first year. That would put BCH today around 100 billion, right? In terms of market cap. In that bond.
If we'd risen proportionally to the entire market cap, you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. If it moved along with the rest of the market. And right now,
like if our dominance stayed the same, is what you're saying? Because
exactly. And right now it's like 6.5. So
yes.
That's like a 15x difference.
Yeah, but that's taking out the fact that there's been so many coins launched in the meantime, and most of the ones above us is like a load of VC pump. Like Solana is like 90% supply locked or whatever, and have had a huge like marketing campaign.
Yes.
I mean, I see what you're saying, but I think you're drawing a bit of a long bow here to assume that BCH dominance would have stayed the same if nothing else had changed. It might have been the opposite.
Sure. Nevertheless, what happened is exactly what I said would happen at the time, right? Like, so it's not like I'm pulling a rabbit out of my hat today, being like, look at what happened, and you should have picked. And I was saying the same thing at the time, like, like if you do this, here is what's gonna happen, and people did this, and everything I said would happen pretty much did happen, right? So it's not like this came out. Maybe I was just lucky, to get it right. But it's not like me looking back today and finding reasons why things went that way. It was also me at the time be like, okay, if we go down that path, here is what's going to happen.
Yes, I agree with you. And I think you're right. I think, probably, I don't know specifically if you can say what kind of things you were saying, but the obvious things are like the market cap will go down, other coins will get ahead. Maybe you would argue that technological development would slow down or things like that, right? That's what you're talking about?
Yeah. So my main point was like, one of the things you need to succeed in that space is credibility, in front of other actors in the space, like exchange, payment processor, investor, other developers as well, right? Because if you want to attract people to build something on top of your technology, they need to be convinced that you're gonna fuck it up from under their feet in some way, right? And there are different angles that you can go for with that, right? So BTC, for instance, is like, all right, we're just not gonna change anything important ever, right? Like we are maybe gonna tweak some stuff here and there, but like everything that is today is gonna be in 10 years. And that comes with a trade-off, right? Because the trade-off is that that in 10 years, it's not gonna be significantly better than today, right? But you also know what it's gonna be in 10 years. And it's pretty much, I think, the only coin in the whole ecosystem where you can say that. Right. Like another way to go at it is like, okay, you have the Ethereum Foundation, leads the coin, it has resources to develop like a very strong ecosystem. It has some of the best brain, powering it. So in that sense, and very good relation with, like every exchange and whatnot. So in that sense, it's more of a businessy way of approaching the thing, but it's also a way to build credibility in the ecosystem. There are different things that you can do. And where BCH had an opportunity is, like you don't want to really commit to a leader because that was not in the ethos of BCH. So now you have two angles that you can go for if you're not committing to a leader. You're going to commit to either a roadmap or a process. Okay, so the problem is like the process angle also doesn't quite work. First, because it's actually what BTC does, except their process is like you're not gonna change anything ever, but that's a process, right? Because by nature the process is gonna be very slow and inefficient, right? That's
maybe. Yeah, well, I mean, yes. Any like a company can have processes. Like any bureaucracy that you add is going to be less efficient than dictatorship, right?
Yeah. So no, if you but you can do that when you're the top dog, right? So the company that are run as bureaucracy, for instance, they're not going to be your IBM or Microsoft, or like this kind of like big company that are well established and can keep going. But you cannot start a startup and run it as a bureaucracy and expect it to work, right? So you can do that when you are the top dog. And it's actually a good strategy when you're the top dog because those tend to be very stable. So
nobody can fuck it up. Yeah.
So that creates, actually, when you do that, you optimize for the lifespan of the organization, essentially, right? You sacrifice efficiency, but, in 20 years, Microsoft is going to be around, right? In 20 years, I don't know, like, will WhatsApp or whatever, like we're using InviteCam, like is InviteCam going to be around in 20 years? Like, we don't know. And we cannot be like even if you think it's going to be around, you're going to have to put qualifier on that, right? It's not something that is certain, right? So you cannot do that. Excuse me?
It is open source, so we have a backup here.
Yeah, sure, but it's not sufficient, right? You're gonna need like enough people behind it, because otherwise people are gonna just use another tech stack. And I'm not blaming them. I'm just using them because I have the thing in front of me right now. But I could use like pretty much any other stuff. So when you are the smaller guy, you cannot be run as a bureaucracy. That's not gonna work. So what is left to you is commit to a roadmap. And this is why, like, for the whole history of BCH, we're like, okay, we need to establish a roadmap and have people commit to it and so on, because this is like either you have a dictatorship or you have a roadmap. That's the only way out, right? Then any other path leads to some kind of failure. Right. But we found ourselves in an ecosystem where people essentially believe that having a roadmap is some form of collusion. And so most people were strongly opposed to it. And then,
Yeah, so I guess the argument there was like, if you have a roadmap, who decides the roadmap? Who decides what's on the roadmap? And your contention is that essentially, well, tell me a bit about this whole benevolent dictator thing, right? Because you have that on your Twitter profile now, Benevolent Dictator of XEC or BCH ABC. You had that sort of as your branding or marketing. And I actually can speak for myself that when I was looking into BCH, because I dropped out of crypto a bit after the block size war, and I thought, okay, this is a big sign that BCH isn't really going to make it here. If you had you, who was one of the most influential people, branding yourself as the Benevolent Dictator, even if it's a joke, then it's still the fact that it would be an acceptable joke, or that it would be like, haha, jokes are funny because they have a grain of truth in them, right? So I found that a really problematic element of the coin. So why did you choose that? Is that part of this logic that you said, okay, somebody needs to be like, I'm going to set the direction, everyone jump on board with it, and that's how we can compete against the larger BTC?
Well, so first thing is, it's actually a common term in open source circle that, whoever
like
started the project is.
Yes.
I think the first person it was used for was Guido van Rossum for the Python programming language. But no, it's quite a common term. Like when someone start an open source project, it's not really an official title, but people call them Benevolent Dictator. But it's always those things start, right? Like even BTC start that way at the beginning of Satoshi, and whatever Satoshi say, thing go in that way, right? And as the project grow and more people come around, then you can decide of, in direction that people can agree on or process, and then, things go that way. Because the problem with dictatorship is that it works very well at small scale, but as soon as things get bigger, it just doesn't work very well.
Yeah, because
the dictator is not infinitively expendable.
Yes.
So you want to eventually deviate toward committing to a roadmap or committing to a process. But, and you say it as a grain of truth, but it's always the case. Like someone has to take the step at some point to make a project happen. Right? Like the project just don't appear out of the void. So you always start a project in the position where you have a benevolent dictator. Like that's always the case.
Yes, and I think this is a really interesting framing of it, right? Because then I also wanted to ask you about being the creator of BCH, because in my mind, and you might, I would guess, disagree, but I'm interested to hear your take. To me, BCH is just the continuation of Bitcoin. So in your explanation there, Satoshi was the benevolent dictator. Over time, it sort of transitioned to the community through that. And then you were certainly helpful in continuing that. But that I think the community still felt that at least some people, that it was owned still by the community. And so in my mind, the creator of BCH is still Satoshi, and we did as the history went on, right? But there was no requirement to have sort of another phase of benevolent dictatorship, which would then, you say, transition away from again. So tell me about that.
There is that's because someone has to make the fork happen.
Yeah, so
fork just don't happen out of the void, right?
Yeah. So can you explain to me when you decided, look, okay, we got to do the fork with BCH? How did that actually go down, specifically, because you're the best person to ask?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned in the early days of the whole big block stuff, I was like, okay, I'm gonna try to help various people that were there, but very quickly I was like, okay, those people are just not gonna make it. So then I started working with Christopher Jeffrey from Purse.io. Because he had this idea of making extension blocks to Bitcoin, and that was essentially a way to create bigger blocks, but as a soft fork. So it seems like a good solution, because some people at the time, they were very insistent that you have to do things as a fork. So okay, let's do it that way. Why not? And the proposal was to grow to 8 megabyte. Well, it would have been 9 in total, right? The idea was to create an 8 megabyte extension block to the main chain, and it would have led to 9 megabytes of capacity overall. And so I worked on that for a while, but then there was the whole Segwit 2x stuff that happened, and it kind of removed the wind of all those other projects. right? Because suddenly, like, that was where the industry was going. And I was like, wait a minute, like this plan is not gonna work. It's like, okay, you're gonna activate SegWit and you're gonna activate the other thing like 2 months later. But at that point, like, the people that want SegWit, and actually SegWit was not that bad, I would say, something that maybe distinguished me from other bigger blocker. But like, some people wanted SegWit and smaller blocks, and some people wanted to activate bigger blocks. So once you have activated SegWit, those people, they have no reason to go along with the activation of larger block. And also, because the activation of larger block is hard fork, you find yourself in a position where the status quo is a very strong pool, which means that even if there is larger support for the bigger block, actually the smaller block is going to win, right? Like, you need to have overwhelming support for the hard fork for it to win, right?
Yes.
The threshold to make it happen is way higher. And so I was like, okay, like, if you give all your bargaining power 2 months before you need to have like an overwhelming agreement, it's just not going to work for. There's no technical reason behind it, but it's just like the strategy of how you deploy the thing just essentially is
doomed. It's doomed.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, the likelihood that it's gonna work is very low. So I was like, all right, and now everybody went there, even like most big blocker were in support of that thing. And I was like, okay, it's not gonna activate, so I need a plan B. And at that point, the plan B was, like, we're gonna do a minority fork and go along with that, because the main chain, like, bad strategy helping the main chain is essentially lost for the big blockers. So I started working on that, and even like before we deployed, the development process was already super wonky, because I don't know if you remember, but the original difficulty adjustment that we had was really bad.
Yes.
And the design decision behind it was that, and I think this is one of the big mistakes that I made, but I still wanted to have like Classic and BU and all of that along. They were not super motivated because they wanted to be the main chain, right? Like, they were not at the time very interested in having a minority bigger block Bitcoin. They wanted to activate big block on the main chain. So they didn't really help with development, but nevertheless, we submitted patches to support BCH to those projects, and this is how they ended up being able to. But I don't remember exactly who, but I know like several of the people involved there. They were like, we are only interested in being the main chain with bigger block. We are not interested in being the minority fork, and therefore we don't want any kind of difficulty adjustment. And I was like, okay, this is gonna be a minority chain. Like, this is this is already done at this point. Like, it didn't already happen, but the path
has been cast.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, it's where it's going, right? So I was like, okay, what can I do to because it's important to have like enough people on board so that you create some kind of network effect as well, right? So I'm like, okay, what can I do here? And so we ended up designing that difficulty adjustment algorithm in such a way that if you are the majority chain, that algorithm behaves the same as the current BTC algorithm. And that was the design constraint. And that was the design characteristic of that difficulty adjustment algorithm that allowed us to convince those people. Yeah, exactly, right? It's like, okay, you know what? Like, if we are the majority chain, it's going to behave exactly the same as BTC. It's as if we changed nothing. But if we are the minority chain, we don't die.
We're going to die. Yes. Smart. Yeah.
And so that was a very bad algorithm, but that was essentially the design constraint behind it. That was not really technical, but getting people on board. And so we developed that. We ended up getting some people to agree to run that thing, and then once you develop the thing, it's all like contacting exchanges, contacting like payment processor like BitPay and whatnot, contacting like everybody in the space that you can think of, miners as well, obviously. You want to contact like everybody that you can think of and find the contact of and be like, okay, here is what we're doing, and can you support that thing and whatnot. And for the first 2 months or so, not much happened actually, because people were still looking at Segwit 2x. But when Segwit 2x...
So you mean after the split or before?
Yeah, after the split at the beginning.
Well, hang on. I just want to get this history in, because I'm fascinated by this. The actual split, like, so you got everything ready, right? It's you and any other people that were significantly involved are all in like a Slack group or something, and then you're like launch where you like, I don't know if this is gonna crash.
It's remarkably few people. It's like most of the code is me. Free Trader did some code as well, but it was maybe like 3/4, 1/4 or something like that. So I did the majority of the code, and Free Trader helped quite a bit as well. And then Journal Fuel went around like contacting everybody possible. He also like find someone to do the Electron Cash wallet, and and then we were talking to a couple of miners, and like that was the team. That was the team at the beginning. Yeah.
So when it launched, like walk me through the moment that the fork happened, because it was announced in advance. There was like people speculating on those Bitfinex and whatever with the futures and everything. Were you confident that it would come off, or was it kind of like a last gasp effort when it did come off? Were you like, this is great, we're free, we've saved Bitcoin, or how did you feel at that moment?
This is not the kind of time where you really have the time to sit down and think about that, right? Because it's like, like this thing is launching. You're working all day long and everything is on fire, and you have like people to convince when things are not on fire. So I don't know. Like at the time, I didn't really have like a philosophical expectation of what would come and whatever. It's like if we're gonna have a big block Bitcoin, this is probably our best shot, and then like whatever happens, right? You're very much focused on giving it the best shot, and not very much, because anyway, like if the fork doesn't happen, then what the fuck you care about, it would be in a year or 2 years or whatever. It's like, let's make it to next month. And
yes. Well, it sounds very startup style, like you were saying, right?
Yeah.
So you're scrapping it together, on evenings or whatever. You just like go and fly. So were you doing any other like job or anything else at this time, or it was just like all in on like making BCH fly?
No, at the time I was all in. Yeah.
Okay. So the split happens, it launches, it kind of comes off, and then in the aftermath, when things slowed down a bit and you had a bit of time to reflect, like you said, first couple of months, you say it was kind of quiet, right? So you're just keeping it ticking along?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of quiet. Like a lot of people were talking about it and whatnot, but everybody was very much in like wait and see mode, because there was the Segwit 2x thing that were supposed to happen, right? So everybody was like, okay, is it going to be Segwit 2x? Is it going to be BCH? Like what? Everybody was very much into like, let's not make rash decision right now. Let's, look at what's going to happen, and then we can decide. And so, yeah, for the first couple of months, everybody was like in wait and see mode. And then Segwit and 2x did not pan out, and, we got very big support after that.
Right. Okay. So, yeah, what in those few months then you were just waiting, because you knew, right? You expected that Segwit was going to blow up, or Segwit 2x was going to blow up. So you were like, look, let's just sit on this for a while, and then they'll all realize.
Well, very quickly, like one of the first things that happened after the launch is like we needed to design a new difficulty adjustment algorithm, right? Okay. And we kind of knew that from the get-go. But once we were launched and once we were the minority chain, this whole argument about we only want to be the bigger chain and whatnot, it didn't really have any ground in the debate anymore, right? So that was not a concern. So the first item, after the fork was like, okay, we need to redesign the difficulty adjustment and figure out to deploy that.
Yeah. So BCH then gets rolling. You get a huge surge of support sort of towards the end of the year, right? There was like the Coinbase listing, the price went through the roof.
Yeah, after Segwit
there was like hype, right?
Yeah, after Segwit 2x failed, we got on Kraken, on Coinbase, on like all the big exchange. We got support from BitPay and various like Destinia and whatnot, like various shops, started crypto-friendly shops started taking BCH, and I just actually like for me, this is where the bad thing start to happen.
Okay, all right, walk me through that. Yeah.
Well, because like before that, it's hard work, but it's rewarding. Like you build shit, it works. Good. It's I don't know, like I don't know. I never started a podcast, so maybe I'm talking out of my ass. But when you start something, you usually are willing to work pretty hard on it, because then like what you do makes things happen, and you can see and you can adjust and try to make it better and all of that, right? So it's hard work, but it's also quite empowering and satisfying, right? But at least I find that myself. But then, like after Segwit 2x fail, you have like all the people that have all the bad ideas that didn't work before coming in and being like, okay, actually, like you're doing this wrong. You need to do this and that and whatnot. And suddenly you start doing, like 70% of politics and 30% of actually, improving the thing. And that was not as fun at all.
Yeah, I can see how it would be like frustrating, especially in a case where these people, they hadn't necessarily, you had explained to them, this is where you're going wrong, and this is how I'm going to do it, which is the right way. And then your way comes off and their way kind of doesn't, or has some problems or whatever. And then they want to switch sides, but maybe not acknowledge like, wait, I was wrong. You had it right. So now I need to listen more than I need to be, saying how things should go, right?
Yeah, well, that did not happen.
Well, people aren't like that, right? So then other people felt like they had some sort of ownership or stake in the project, which you feel is
yeah, they were actually quite bitter for the most part, because they have been trying to do that for years and it didn't work. And there is this dude that essentially come out of nowhere. There's like, here is how you need to do it, and like does something and it works, and I don't know, like they from their perspective, or I'm not a mind reader, right? But this is my impression of how they felt. Obviously, you should ask them how they actually felt. But I think that they felt robbed, would have something that they saw, they were working on for years, and they wanted it to happen pretty bad, and they thought that somehow having worked, everybody believes in Mark's theory of value when it's for their own work.
Yes.
So
if I do work,
so they came in, but they were very unhappy about the whole situation. They were quite bitter. And
okay, so you're now in politics, and then even after that period, then between finishing,
and this is when stuff like, okay, we need to have a green logo, not an orange one, and we need to use like BCH instead of BCC, and all those shit, start to come in, and suddenly you have to handle that, and it's super bad for the brand, because now you're listed as BCC and have the exchange and BCH on the other ones, and like it's just.
But this was also
time talking to everybody.
Yeah. I can see that. But this is also at the time there between the start of 2018 and the end of 2018, November, I believe, was the BSV split. So in that 2018 window was when the contention also was with Craig Wright and everything. So what happened there? You've now got multiple competing camps all in.
Yeah, and in some way, it's going to sound a bit crazy, but in some way, the whole N-Chain BCH crew was helpful. Because there was a bit of a tie break or Mexican standoff, if you wish, right, where you have those different sides, and they are all better funded than we are, right? So as long as they point gun at each other, we can still like somewhat control the situation, right? But at some point, Craig decided to go ballistic, forced into BSV, and now we find ourselves completely overwhelmed by the other people that did not fork. And it becomes very, very, very difficult to get anything going at this point.
Okay, this is a fascinating take. So you're saying, you had like the BU people and other people over here. Yeah. You had the BSV people over here, and they're all in chaos amongst each other. But at least it's amongst each other. And then
and they were more or less keeping each other in check as a result of that.
And then the Craig split off, and he, did his own way with the hash war and everything. Talk me through that a bit of the hash war.
Actually, it's quite funny because the degree to which Craig does not invent or create anything is quite astounding. Because so first, the whole BSV was, Majorian coming up with it with the Satoshi Vision conference that happened before the fork, but it just took the name and went along with it. But having the whole hash war, actually, this was something with it's Emil Oldenburg that started that thing, which was the CTO of Bitcoin.com at the time. I think is not anymore. I'm not quite sure. But at the time, he was CTO of Bitcoin.com, and he wanted to activate miner validated tokens, essentially an earlier version of cash token. And nobody wanted that except them. So it was like, well, we have a mining pool, and we're gonna have a hash war over this. And this is where the whole idea of hash war comes from, which was stupid when Emil came up with it, and was stupid as well when BSV tried to do it, because it just doesn't work as an idea. But this is where the whole idea of the hash war comes from.
But they cracked on.
They were like, okay, but it's quite funny. Like when you've seen it from internal, like we know that Craig doesn't really invent anything, but even the stuff that we have not seen too much publicly because either they are stupid or they are trivial or whatnot, like even those stuff, they all come from elsewhere. That's quite remarkable.
Right. Okay. So they give the hash war a college try. It doesn't pan out, but they end up
no, because the consensus rules between the chain are incompatible, right? So at no point you can have more work in your chain and overrule the older chain or whatever. Like they're never gonna reconciliate.
Well, that's true, but the idea still could be if you had the 90%, let's say, the hash rate, which obviously Craig thought he did, he could fork, he could make his longer than BCH, and then you could basically DDoS the other fork until it died, essentially, and it lost all credibility in the market.
So you can DDoS the other fork, yes. And people tried to do that when we went away with XEC.
Yes.
But that's not the idea of the hash war, right? The idea of the hash war is like, we're gonna put a shit ton of hash on our chain, like way more than the economics makes sense.
Justify,
right? Yeah, the economics justify, yes. And because of that, like somehow we're gonna win. It's not clear what you're gonna win, or what's, because I don't know, like if you are within the same chain and there are two tips, and you put a bunch of hash on one, then that tip is going to win. But at this point, you have two different chains with different consensus rules. So they are never going to converge in any kind of way. So I don't know what they were hoping would happen, but nothing could really happen.
Well, it seems a bit ill-conceived from that point of view. But maybe I'm over-crediting Craig and Calvin with it, but my understanding, and maybe this is just something that I've invented, was that it would be like, okay, we're going to split the chain, and then we're going to destroy the credibility of your chain through reorgs and stalling the chain until the exchanges.
Yes, but they never did.
Market. Yeah, no, they never did, right? So it was all.
They said that they would do that, but they never did.
Yes, but were you concerned that they would? Did you think?
Oh, yes.
The chance to? Okay.
Yes, we were very much concerned that they would, but they never did.
So then they're gone, and you're somewhat relieved because they have failed, but at the same time now you've been left without this counterbalanced political
exactly.
situation.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the story from there? BSV leaves end of 2018, coming into 2019. What happens in BCH?
Well, we start trying to, set stuff to have a roadmap. Like at least on the consensus level, but even outside of the consensus level, trying to provide like a good infrastructure for people to build upon the chain. Things like provide an indexer in the node, which, I mean, like the whole indexer situation, and not just in BCH, actually in the whole ecosystem is absolutely hilarious. Like people have built. So people did not want it to build an indexer into the node, right? So they always ended up building a bunch of indexer that runs, as a second server that talks to the node and everything. But it's exceedingly difficult to make an indexer that works well in that way, because if you have like any kind of communication between your indexer and the node that drops at any kind of
slows things down. Yeah.
Well, first it slows things down. Like from a resource consumption perspective, it's no good, right? But even aside of that, like just making it reliable is exceedingly difficult because, like if there is any kind of message between those two programs that is lost,
dropped.
Then suddenly, you get inconsistent state between the two. There is no obvious way to reconcile that state. It's very
except like roll it back and yeah.
Yeah, but even like how do you roll back to what point and whatnot? And like very simple things can get them out of sync. Think about it, like you need to restart one of them because you want to upgrade the version of the software, for instance. Well, you cannot stop them exactly at the same time, right? Like, and so there is always the chance that even if you try to stop them roughly at the same time, there is always the chance that, one of them stops before the other. Actually, that's going to happen. But there could be a message that is sent in between, that gets lost, and suddenly there is a transaction that you can double spend for the perspective of the indexer, or that doesn't exist from the perspective of the indexer. And you throw in like reorgs and stuff like that into the mix, and that becomes very, very difficult to make something that is reliable. And even if you can make it reliable, the resources consumption is through the roof. So, the obvious conclusion is like you need to build an indexer in the node. But people have been funding like indexer and again inside of the node. And so we ended up doing that with XEC because now we have self-funding, so we can fund this kind of stuff. And it's quite funny because now many like BTC-like coins want to use that. Actually, I know that a lot of people have started using that in the BCH ecosystem.
Yes.
A lot of people that were using BCHD that is not so well maintained have moved to the solution we provide. And I know that we have some interest also in the Doge ecosystem and various other ecosystem for that solution. And this is the kind of stuff, at the time we tell people, hey, like here is what we need to build. And instead, you have like 3 different teams building 3 different indexer, and none of them is going to pan out because they all have the same architectural problem in it. So that's one example, but that's essentially how rare things start happening after the BSV split.
Right. So you have that going on for a while and you're getting dissatisfied with this. So it comes to a point where you say, look, I need some more funding, right? And that was walk me through the issue with the funding and then how it turned into the whole debate.
Well, because to maintain the thing, like for a point of comparison, chain like BTC or ETH at the time roughly spent 20 million a year, give or take, on maintaining and building the infrastructure. And like not only we don't even have like 10% of that, we have like a few $100K a year. And not only that, we have like people throwing wrenches into everything that we do. So it's completely unmanageable. And at the time, I'm like, okay, we think we can do it with a 2 million budget, which is like 10x better than the rest of the team. So that may seem like a big number, but by the standard of the field, it was actually quite very, very reasonable. And we try different way. We try self-funding. We try convincing people to sponsor and whatnot. But on the sponsoring front, what would invariably happen is that we get some funding, and then we have people throwing the wrenches, getting like even the same funding or sometimes more. So that just doesn't help. That creates more problem for us. There was some support from the self-funding for a while, and then there wasn't. So we're like, okay, we just cannot go on in that way anyway. So we're gonna do our own thing.
Yeah.
So at that point, like a lot of people start to demonize us. We are destroying BCH, yada yada yada, and they present themselves as saviors. But most of those saviors, they are nowhere to be found today.
Yeah, so I think that's a super interesting element of that. We'll get to that in a second. But so you say, okay, we need 2 million to fund this. We don't have the 2 million. I'm going to add in the 8%. What is it now? Is it 8% or 12% Coinbase distribution, right? Tax. You add that, and then you say, okay, this is how we're going to do it. I can't see any other way forward. And then it turns into a chain split. Is that how it went down?
Yeah. Pretty much. We're not gonna back down from that. We were saying 8% at the time on BCH, which was more than enough to fund everything that we needed to fund. And it's quite funny also because when you run the economics of it, you realize that the BTC ecosystem is paying for it, which is very interesting. Because so what happened is like, it's as if BCH became 8% more difficult to mine, right? And so you're gonna have like 8% less hash on BCH, with difficulty adjustment. It's always gonna be roughly as profitable to mine the different chain, right? The economics of it, because the hash is just gonna move between them up to the point where it's roughly the same profitability within the chain. So you would say, we put like a 8% Coinbase rule on BCH, and now the BCH miner makes 8% less. But this is not what happened. It's like every single chain in the ecosystem becomes slightly more difficult to mine, right? Because the day of the activation, it's like 8%, but as a result, you have hash moving along the chain, and difficulty adjusts. Yes, and because BTC is the biggest one, most of the money actually comes from the BTC ecosystem
to fund the mining infrastructure and so forth.
If you look where the money is actually coming from, it's coming from the 90% of it. If you assume BCH is 10% of the value, and 90% of the value is BTC, which was roughly the case at the time, you realize that actually 90% of the money come from the BTC ecosystem. So that's that's a huge deal, from an economic standpoint, that's the right move.
But then the problem then is, even if in this initial case where you're assuming that no other funding method can be found, which I would say people would argue, that's what happened, right? They created Flipstarter. The other nodes have still been funded and running, so there was an alternative found. But even in hang on.
Look at
hang on. We'll get to that.
We'll get to that. That happens, right? It's very.
We'll get to that. Yeah, we'll get to that in a second, right? But first, you put in the Coinbase amount of money, right? Then what would you say if people said, well, the concern is that the money is going to you or to the development fund, and you've now created essentially a centralized, choke point that what is this money being used to then propel BCH back up to the top of the leaderboard, and then you would take it away, or it's just going to be there in perpetuity? What would be the game plan there?
So the plan, and I actually executed that plan on SEC. The plan was to use pre-consensus to remove that rule from the consensus rules. and we did that, which means that today we get some money from the Coinbase on XEC. This is not a consensus rule, right? So if tomorrow most of the holder disagree that we should be funded, or think that someone else should be funded, or want to change the amount or anything, this can happen, and there is not much we can do about it. And this was the plan on BCH as well. We tried to pitch like pre-consensus and stuff like that. I'm not quite sure what the support for pre-consensus was. At the time, I know like Craig was very much opposed to it, but then when he left, it's unclear. I think, it was used a lot as a wage issue, but I don't know, people really felt about it. But it's really like, it's the solution to that problem.
Yes.
You can put those rules into the pre-consensus rules, because when you don't have the same, like the problem is like when you don't have the same consensus rule, you create a chain split. Mm-hmm. Right. Yes. So essentially, if you put in the consensus rule, hey, you need to pay that much to that team so that they can maintain the network. It becomes very difficult to change, even for the team itself. Changing the situation of the funding becomes a hard fork, which means that you need to deploy and have an activation mechanism, and it's difficult even for the team. But you don't need to have consensus on the pre-consensus rules, right? Not all the nodes need to agree on the pre-consensus rule. They are just gonna vote onto. So what happened with pre-consensus is like when the node receive a block, it's gonna obviously validate it as per the consensus rule. But if they are valid, then it's gonna run like its own subjective rules as to whether it wants to accept that block or not, right? And those rules can be anything. And then they run a reconciliation algorithm in between each other. Like each node makes its own decision, and then they can reconcile that, and it takes about 2 seconds. So it's fine. And the funding mechanism is in there as well. So you can just release another version of the node with like another rule in there. And if enough people run the other version of the node, then you're good. And the one that have the current rule in it are going to be overridden in the vote every time.
Yes. So my argument would be that that's what happened. The community decided that they didn't want it, and it just happened before rather than with pre-consensus, and it ended up being a chain split. That's kind of how I would put it. And I wanted to put this to, like you said.
And the way I would put it in very short is like, it's a very good way to spend billions to avoid spending millions.
Well, I think that's one take. I was going to give you this phrase, they say, why is divorce so expensive? Because it's worth it, right? And so I'm just floating this hypothetical to you: the BSV split, the BTC split, the XEC split.
I think the BSV split was worth it. The XEC split was, I don't know, it was definitely worth it for us, but I don't think it was worth it for the BCH ecosystem.
Okay, why not?
Because the cost was absurdly high, and all the people that said they wanted it very much, they are not there anymore. So clearly they didn't value it very much, right? Like it's really preferences.
But then the project started to track. Like me, I came back as a result of that split, right? So the people who supposedly fought so hard over it, not all of them, but some of them then left the project. So maybe you feel that they were just being spiteful or something, right? And then they didn't care.
No, I don't think so. Like, I don't know, like maybe some of them, I think most of them, they believed in their own bullshit, right? But like if your ideology doesn't comply with reality, it doesn't matter how much you believe in it, right? It's just not gonna
Why do you think those people left then? Do you have any names? Like which specific people, and why do you think that they left?
I mean, like BU is working on Nexa these days.
Yes.
Like the whole people behind the SLP ecosystem, they're all gone. Essentially, I don't know, like the whole Bitcoin.com team doesn't like promote BCH that much anymore. They mention it in passant sometime, but it's not, it's not behind, it's just like people like Jonathan Tumim as well, very vocal at the time, is nowhere to be found today.
Yes.
there are a few that were very vocal at the time that said, and I've mentioned Kalin before, but those are very much the exception. Like most of the people that were there at the time, it's just like,
so now we've gotten,
they're like they got the house and they trashed it, and they were like, this is not a nice place to live in anymore, and they left.
Okay. All right. So now, yeah. Well, maybe that's a fair point of view, and I will say that when I started the podcast, it was because in my mind, I somewhat agreed with you. I felt like BCH needed something different. It clearly had a strong technical founding, which you're in part responsible for, and thank you very much for that, because that was really well done. But it was lacking, a direction. It was lacking credibility, like you said, all of the splits and arguments.
It was not lacking a direction.
You don't think so?
I mean,
without you there, though.
It did not have a direction, but it was not lacking a direction in the sense that the people that were opinion leader in the community were explicitly opposed to the fact that it should have a direction. Right? Well, it was not like, we should have a direction. It's too bad that we don't have one, and we should make a no. It was like, if we have a direction, like somehow we are colluding with each other.
Well, I think we're talking at cross purposes here, because when I'm talking about a direction, I don't mean a technical roadmap. Is that what you're talking about?
Not necessarily.
Okay, so because for me, when I say direction, what I mean is, like, I have the start of this show, following Bitcoin Cash on its rise to global reserve currency. Like, to me, that is the direction. And I've summarized it down to that. And then I've also spent a lot of time in the community, talking to people who are influential and getting everybody sort of aligned on that mission, and actually going out of my way to even try and, put down or marginalize people who are trying to just create grief, right? So that's my version of but I feel like I had to add that. I think it was already there in the community, but it wasn't well explained.
But also, like, the people I'm mentioning, because I'm not saying that it had a strong direction or whatever. I'm just like, maybe I'm nitpicking on the words that you're using. But when you say lack of direction, that implies that people thought that it should have a direction, but it doesn't, right? Like when you say lack something.
I don't care what people thought. Right? I think what I thought, I thought that it lacked a direction.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was, at least at the time of the fork, that was not the zeitgeist in like across opinion leaders in the project. And most of them thought that having a direction was, an explicitly bad thing. But
that's not sustainable.
Maybe most of those people have left now, and so it can have a direction. I'm not quite sure what the zeitgeist is at this point, because I'm not really part of it anymore. Also, I've been blocked from many of those stuff, which I always found like quite funny, because people in the BCH ecosystem have been bitching about like censorship from RBTC and whatnot. But I'm actually blocked from not our Bitcoin, but I'm blocked from RBTC, for instance. So
that's a shame. But I mean, there's not so much chat there anymore, so.
There is not much chat in our Bitcoin as well. It's what happened when you start censoring a place, it's just not so interesting very quickly, right? Like at the beginning, it's a circle jerk, and then, there's so much circle jerking you can do before it's almost the same.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So we get to this point, right? BCH. So now let's take a look. We're here nearly 4 years later, right? It'll be November this year, so a couple months until it's the 4-year anniversary of the split, and where BCH and where XEC is at. So maybe let's start with BCH. You've already said a little bit, like you think CashTokens maybe wasn't such a good idea. You're not that impressed with the technical direction. I don't know. Any other either criticisms or praise for what do you think of BCH where it's at today?
I mean, it's still pretty good achievement. I would say, like, it's hovering around 15 or so in the coin market cap, something like that. It's one of the major coin. It has, major penetration across the board. Like, So I don't know if you guys are familiar with Charles Schwab, but it's like a broker, to buy stocks and stuff like that. That is pretty big in the US. And I have an account there, and like they support, like maybe not buying BCH directly, but buying like what essentially amounts to ETFs for BCH, right? So this kind of stuff is like really, it's really big, right? So BCH still has a huge market penetration, very big brand recognition, and a bunch of stuff. So that's very good, but the rest of it, I think, is not really moving in the right direction. I find it a bit sad, right? Because there is so much potential there. Like on that front, BCH is in such a better position than eCash is, right? Because we had to start small. We essentially had to start from nothing, right? Where BCH has a huge penetration, huge network effect, and brand recognition and all of that. So, but in that sense, that also means that BCH should really be in the top 5, right? Because everything that I'm talking about, like Solana, is not at that stage, for instance. And you can say, well, it's VC pumped and all of that, but you cannot buy Solana on Charles Schwab, which is like your ultimate boomer platform, right? You can buy BTC, ETH, and BCH there, right? Like that's pretty much it. In that sense, I think that the performance of BCH is somewhat disappointing when you compare it to the gain of brand recognition and market penetration that it has. And I would say but the opposite for XEC. So maybe I don't know. I would say, like, from a tech perspective, it's probably one of the best projects out there. But I'm obviously not objective on that front. But we managed to deploy the Avalanche protocol on it and deploy pre-consensus, and this allowed us to move like the self-funding into pre-consensus, for instance. That also allowed us to defeat the 51% attacks, because when we forked people in the BCH ecosystem, I mean, I don't know who that is, right? So maybe it's not from the BCH ecosystem, but I would expect at least, someone probably from the BCH ecosystem wanted to 51% attack the chain. It didn't work thanks to that. So that's also a proof that it's not just, like buzzword bingo technology. It's, actual technology that is, that is real, that works, and we know that because it was tried by fire, right? So I think that's pretty good on that front, and it's always like, to me, it's a bit disheartening because you'd have the technology that we have on Zec, on BCH, the sky is the limit, essentially.
So one thing that I have never understood about the pre-consensus idea is that then essentially you have the Avalanche consensus and you have the proof of work consensus. And I never understood what happens if it conflicts, because if the proof of work says one thing and the Avalanche says another thing, then if the proof of work wins, then why did you even need that Avalanche? Like, it wasn't consensus. But if you have the Avalanche wins, then why did you need the proof of work? Because it was never relevant to anything. Can you explain that contradiction?
It's a bit complicated, but there are different reasons, and basically it boils down that those two different algorithms, they are very, very different properties. So proof of work is going to accumulate over time, and you can audit it, after the fact. So in that sense, but it's very slow. So in that sense, it's a bit like a notary,
Yes,
that's gonna register transaction, but
legal office, whatever. It takes
yeah, exactly
months,
right. It takes a long time. But so if you were to use only Avalanche, you would find yourself in this, like, you would have two, I think, problems that are quite important. The first one is the bootstrap problem. It's like, okay, you're a new node, you connect to the network. How do you know what the state of the world is? Well, you have to trust, like, is there an authority, or be lucky and connect to the right node right away, because you have no way to bootstrap yourself. So that's not the case with proof of work, effectively, where you can see what is the longest chain and choose that and validate it and whatnot, right? So you have the bootstrap problem. And the second problem is like the security is not cumulative on Avalanche, right? So right now we have about $20 million equivalent of security on Avalanche on XEC, but it's a one-time thing, right? So
it doesn't compound. Yeah, it's just
decision
20
N
million,
plus
20 million.
one doesn't add 20 million of security to decision N, right? It's just like a fixed amount. Whereas each block
Proof of work is cumulative. Yeah.
Accumulates the work over time. So over a longer time scale, you want to have something that is more cumulative because you are just going to accumulate more security. No, on the other hand, why we want to use Avalanche? Well, because it can make decision in 2 seconds, right? Or actually less than 2 seconds most of the time. And that allows you to really, the number one thing is that allows you to make decisions that are subjective, which you cannot do at all with anything Nakamoto already did, right? So, for instance, in the block header, you have a time field. And this time field is used for difficulty adjustment. But you can somehow fudge it, right? Because you don't know
no objective clock. Yeah.
There is no objective clock that everybody can rely on. Everybody has its own clock, but you cannot even make a decision based on your own clock, right? Because then you're gonna reject the block while your next guy, is maybe accept it, whatever, right? So the node is gonna reject the time when it's like completely outrageous, right? Like there is the value is actually like when it's more than 2 hours in the future. The node is gonna reject the block. But if it's like arbitrary in the past or less than 2 hours in the future, then the node is just gonna be okay, fine. I'm taking the block because you cannot do anything, somewhat fine-grained because it's a subjective decision, and therefore, and you have problem with that, right? Because if I receive a block, and then 5 minutes later, I receive another block, that orphan that block, and someone start building upon it. Like, how do I decide whether I want to accept that because it's a longer chain, or whether it's a 51% attack, right? Like from all the objective information that I have at my disposal, I cannot really make the difference between the two, right? Because maybe that chain was there all along. I was just not aware of it because nodes are not sending it to me for some reason, right? So there is no way for me to know if there is some network, some network malfunction that's going to settle itself automatically, or if I'm actually facing an attack. And the way I would need to, like the information I would need to have to know it's an attack is whether everybody considers the block that I have as the tip of the chain. Because then like somebody come out of the blue from nowhere and be like, okay, I have a new tip and it has more work, it's a 51% attack. So the fact that you can make decision like very quickly allows you to make decision based on that. Now, there is an obvious problem that you mentioned, is that like what happened when those two protocols don't agree with each other. And so first thing, ultimately there is a problem in XEC. If they disagree for like more than 2 weeks or something like that, we're gonna be in trouble. But we make the assumption that someone is not gonna mine in the wind for 2 weeks for a chain that is out of consensus, so that like 2 weeks later you're gonna have a big problem. No, that's an assumption that we're making. And I think it's a pretty safe assumption to make, because 2 weeks is like, very much a long time. Mining is pretty expensive. So, but this is the actual limit. And in detail, it's like we have defined the rule very, very specifically so that they don't step in each other's toe too much, right? So for instance, if Avalanche say this transaction is valid, what that implies for the acceptance of block or not at the Avalanche level would not be whether the block include or not that transaction. It would be whether the block include a double spend of that transaction. So Avalanche does not force the proof of work to do anything. It's just, restrict certain avenue. And if you design it in that way, you reduce the conflict to essentially voluntary behavior. Someone would have to be purposefully out of consensus for 2 weeks or something for that to be really a problem. And why 2 weeks? Because to be able to vote on Avalanche consensus, you need to have a proof that is at least 2 weeks old, which means that after 2 weeks, the set of people that can make decision on Avalanche can start to diverge, right? On the 2 Nakamoto chain. And obviously, the longer the time, and the worse it can get. But after 2 weeks, you start having problems. Before 2 weeks, it's pretty much going to be the same set. So you may be on a different tip of the chain, but you are still going to have the same group of people making decision on Avalanche. And therefore, unless you purposefully want to disregard one or the other for more than 2 weeks, you are always going to find consensus.
Okay. All right. I'll need to think on that a little more. I mean, I'm still just you've just introduced an extra edge case there. So you're kind of soft relying on the Avalanche, and the proof of work is more like a formality rather than the other way around, is what you're telling me, yeah?
Well, but it's also an opportunity to trigger the vote, because we're going to vote on every block. But if you don't have a block to vote on, then what the fuck do you do, right? So the way we've built things, you still need the proof of work to trigger the decision making at the Avalanche level.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. All right. I'll need to think about that some more. I mean, I tend to prefer just that the proof of work is just simple. It's proof of work, and that's that. And I'm not too worried about zero conf.
Well, it's simpler. That's 100% true. But also, to be honest, I would be in the BCH ecosystem. Actually, I still own BCH, so to some extent, I am. I'm not too happy when you look at the difference of price between BTC and BCH right now, you realize that relying purely on Nakamoto consensus for BCH is actually quite dangerous at the time. I mean, right now it does work, but it's because nobody wants to really fuck it up, right? If someone really wanted to fuck it up right now, well, that's not the deal originally, right? The deal originally is that you must be able to trust miners as an aggregate, right? Yes. Not that every single miner is honest.
Yeah, but I think a lot of things that people originally thought about Bitcoin, especially after all the splits and everything, we've been learning about Bitcoin as history has gone forward. And one of the genius...
We've learned that 51% attack is a thing. We've learned that.
Also learned that it's usually
many times.
But it's usually not fatal, right? It's actually less problematic than people originally thought. People thought, okay, 51%,
sure, but
give up.
No, let's go back at the discussion we had earlier. Right, you are one of the bigger coin. You need to convince people that you are stable and secure, and they should rely on you and build upon your ecosystem. And then you're like, well, sure, we could be 51% attack, but we've seen in the past that it was usually not fatal, right? That's it. People are going to be like, okay, those guys, they are not taking this seriously, right?
No, I know hang on. I know that's not the most credible position, but what I'm saying is it's a sort of unintentionally genius part of Bitcoin's design is that as BCH gets less relevant, by hash rate, right, it also becomes less relevant to attack. So it's kind of fine if it has sort of not security by obscurity exactly, but security by irrelevance, but then by the time it gets relevant, it has reacquired the hash rate, right? So it's a sliding scale that balances itself.
There is 10, if not hundreds of millions to make attacking BCH right now.
So why hasn't but it's still not worth it apparently, right? We know that.
I mean, sure, but
it's working, right? Like you said before, if reality is disagreeing with you,
I've been driving without a seatbelt for ages, and I never crashed, right? So it's probably very secure to do so. It's like you can think that way for a feature or stuff like that, but you should not think about security in that way, because that's really not how it works. Like typically, security are very improbable events that have very big consequences, right?
Yes.
And so if you're like, well, it never happened, it's not how you want to think about it.
Yeah. No, I understand that. So if what percentage of the hash rate do you think BCH would need to be very credible in terms of its security?
I've been asked many times, actually, even in the BCH days, and I've said by then 5%, and I still think that's okay. Like as long as BCH is less than 5% at BTC, I wouldn't feel
very confident in it.
Yeah. It's a bit scary.
Okay, so let's say, well, this is also something I wanted to ask you, right? Which is, what could convince you that BCH had got things right, either in general or about any specific issue? Like if the hash rate went back up, let's say price returns for whatever reason, BCH rockets up the market cap, ends up back in the top 5. It's got 10-20% of the hash rate. Everyone's going berserk. Everyone wants to trade BCH. The adoption starts growing. What would it take?
I'd be very happy. Like people think I'm like a hater or whatever.
Yeah, of course.
Like the feeling is more like, you see your child doing stupid stuff like doing drugs and whatnot, and you're like, well, it's still your child. You don't wish it will, but it's still doing bad stuff, right? Like,
but hang on, yeah. No, and I like this. I like this because that was a Tobias Ruck. I've got to give him a shout out, even though I've beefed with him in the past, and in general I don't like him that much. But he has said, that was the description he gave. He said that, I heard him said on a show sometime, BCH is like Amaury's child that doesn't want to listen to him, from your point of view, right? So you agree with that, yeah?
Yeah.
And but then what would it take though in that scenario if the kid is right? You're like, oh, my kid doesn't want to go to university. They want to start a startup. They start the startup and it turns out to be phenomenally successful. As the dad, at what point do you say, you know what, the kid was right?
Well, I would have to look why it became successful, right? Like if it becomes successful, it's probably because it's doing something right. And I would be very curious as to what that is. But I still think like most of the things that it's doing right now are not quite right. And I hope that, it finds something in the future that, works better.
So what are we doing wrong right now then? Tell me specifically what's going wrong and what should we do instead?
I mean, building credibility and attracting talent is really like the number one thing for BCH at this point. There is too much reliance on gimmicky stuff, but actually gimmicky stuff are good to being noticed and being recognized, but BCH is one of the most well-known coin with the biggest brand recognition. So all those gimmick stuff, they're just useless to BCH. What it needs right now is to demonstrate to the market that it has grown into an adult, right? Like it has passed the point of doing gimmicky stuff, and into the point where it can, provide like enterprise software and whatever, like, all those boring bullshit. But this is what BCH needs to provide at this point. This is the area where it's lacking.
And you don't think we're on the right track with that? Cash tokens, ABLA, VM limits. You don't think that's moving in the right direction?
No, it's all on the feature front. BCH doesn't really need that many feature. I would say like the only front where it needs feature is on the security front, for as long as it's less than 5%.
Yes.
If it's more than 5%, you don't even need that much on the security front. But you need to do stuff like look, you can say, okay, there's all those good features, but at the same time, someone is going to build something and use BCHD as an indexer, and then like at some point it doesn't work anymore. No, they need to change the whole stack. Like, you cannot expect business to build on top of such foundation, right?
But you're talking about infrastructure. You think the technical infrastructure is lacking?
Yes, it's lacking on the technical front, but it's also lacking on the credibility front, right? Because like there is so much software out there, you cannot try it all, right? So at some point you also need to look like how people communicate and behaves and stuff like that, and be like, okay, those are people that get it. I'm gonna give it a shot, because it's not just like you just don't need to be better. Better is not enough, right? Because switching from one stack to another is expensive. It has complication, right? Like if tomorrow I'm telling you, well, you're gonna run your podcast on Zoom instead of invite.com, right?
Yes.
Maybe Zoom is better, but it's gonna be a pain in the ass, right? Because all your workflow, like I'm just saying it's better. Like I'm making a
yes. We know. It's just funny because we used to use Zoom and we switched the other way.
So I didn't know that. Well, I don't know. Like you want to do it on Microsoft Teams.
Yes.
Whatever it is, it doesn't matter, right? But well, okay, you did it the other way around, so good. So you were on Zoom and you moved to invite.com. Well, it's not sufficient for you that invite.com is just as good as Zoom, right? Because you had to change your workflow, you had to, you had to do a bunch of stuff to make that right. So it needs to be sufficiently better so that it justifies the cost of you ditching Zoom and going to invite, right?
Yes.
And you cannot do that, for every new project that come out there, right? So you need to have a problem with the existing one, and you need to have something that is sufficiently better, but also you need to perceive it as sufficiently better so that you are even gonna try, right? It's not sufficient that it's just better. You need to like either see other people doing it and be like, okay, I tried it for my podcast, it worked well for me, you should try it. Or you see the people behind that thing, talking, and they look like serious and they understand your problem very well, and they look like trustworthy, and they're not gonna do something stupid that's gonna screw you over, right, and force you to change again. So there is a technical aspect, but there is also a branding aspect, maybe, or like project recognition kind of thing.
Yeah.
And those two, like BCH is really bad at those two, right? So the from a text perspective, the infrastructure is not that good, but also, things like you did, it's like we mentioned 51% attack. You're like, well, like projects typically survive and whatnot. It's true, right? It's not. It's not like what you're saying is wrong. Typically, like put yourself in the shoe of someone who is running an exchange, and you're talking with, some people from some community, and you run the software, and you're like, well, I'm worried about 51% attack. And they're like, well, usually it's not that bad. And right, like, it's not the answer that you have, right?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I agree that's like taking that specific example, right? I agree that it's not an ideal answer, but the real answer is, okay, we're going to increase the attraction of the chain, get more people in, build more software, do this, that, and the other. The price will go up as a result of increased adoption. We get back hash rate and it's fixed. And in the meantime, it's a Band-Aid measure, right? So it's kind of a case of you can only fight so many battles at once. So that particular case is a battle where I'd say we can't, dedicate a lot of resources to that at the right now, because the better fix is just, instead of the Band-Aid, it's just cure the disease, right? So in that case,
because there is no resources.
Yeah,
that's
right.
Kind of what we left,
right? Yeah, I mean, it's a catch-22, right? So you have to break a vicious cycle, you have to pick one part of the cycle and fix that. And it might take time and might be very difficult, but then that will swing around.
Yeah, but the answer that you're giving right now is much better, right? You're like, okay, we know that there is a risk, but we consider it that it's, from historical standpoint, it's it hasn't happened, and we're taking measures that should improve the price, and therefore should get out of that situation. And we're confident that if we are above 5% of the price of BTC, then this risk essentially does not exist.
Yes.
Like if you say that, then you're communicating. Like you're not just communicating that there is that problem or whatever. You're also communicating to the person at the other side that, okay, I know that there is that problem. I'm taking it seriously. I've put some, thinking into it. And even though like we don't quite agree on the fix, at least, I'm facing people that are serious about security question and they have thought about them, and, they have thought through discourse to present me, right? But if you're like, well, like 51% attack happened before and the chain didn't die. Well, it's true that the chain didn't die, but it's also true that some exchanges have lost millions of dollars during those 51% attack, right? Because the chain was reorged and some transaction that they accepted that people traded on don't exist anymore, or do exist now, didn't exist before, right? So even though the chain did not die, businesses did die because of that, right? So if I'm a business and I'm discussing BCH people, I'm like, okay, those people, they may understand the chain, but they don't understand my problem, right? As a business owner. And well, this is what's missing to go to the next level, really.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. I think so. Credibility at the infrastructure level and at the public communication sort of level, I agree with you. Those are huge problems in BCH, and obviously that's why we have this podcast. This is my attempt to attack that credibility angle, and I think it's been working. I think things have been improving in the way that BCH has been seen, and that's resulted partially in some of the price. Tell me about cash tokens. You said before that the only thing that came about from cash, firstly, technical
it's not the only
design,
thing, but the main impact, I would say.
The main impact so far, or you think the main impact in perpetuity? Like things are getting better. The tooling is improving. We've seen slowly more and more projects started around cash tokens.
It's true, but it doesn't seem to me to be solving a real problem that existed with previous token solutions.
Really? You don't think the miner validation was important, and the unwieldiness of what are they called, indexes for SLP, and the lack of deep integration was a problem?
I mean, then you should like, there is no fundamental reason why the indexer for SLP would be unwindly, right? This is 100% due to how it was built, and you should build it better. Like the fact that the token is miner validated does not really change anything about how hard it is or not to build an indexer, right? So if the indexer for cash token is better, I don't know. I've not tried it.
Well, the SLP.
I know the SLP is like quite finicky, so I'm not debating that. So I have no problem believing the one from cash token might be better. It has not much to do with the fact that it's miner validated.
Really? Well, I mean, because the point was that every time that you got a new SLP token, you would need to know, okay, is this token valid or not, or is somebody trying to scam me, right? You couldn't get an authentic
token. You have to do the same with transaction when you accept them into the node.
Yes, but
it's
that's
not like a new problem
now
that exists out of nowhere.
But we've merged them together now, right? That's the whole point, is now the miners and the regular nodes take care of the cash tokens as well as the regular BCH. So it's not a problem that wallets have to deal with. You don't need a separate indexer, all that kind of stuff, right? That's the idea.
Yeah, but that also means that no, you cannot upgrade it without like it being a hard fork, and right, like you've wired a lot of inflexibility into the system by doing so.
Maybe not. I think seems to be all right so far. We'll see. It was certainly very carefully thought out. But then what about the fact that the SLP is, quite limited in its functionality, right? It was also just kind of like send, receive, mint. You couldn't make much of a DEX with.
Yeah, but the thing is that you can do SLP2, you can do like whatever else. That's the real benefit of it not having been the consensus rule is that you can create 20 different token solution if you want. You don't need the authorization from anyone to do that.
But then you have the same network effect problem, right? If people are
sure, but when you do the cash token stuff, you are effectively betting on the fact that cash token is the ultimate token solution and it's going to fix all the problem that all the people that want to do token do. Which
that's right.
is
yes.
It's a statement that is very unlikely to be true.
What if it is though? Is it because I agree? It's a big bet. Cash tokens is not something to take lightly, but it has been vetted for many years, and I personally was quite impressed with it as a solution. I was supporting it on this show, and I thought, yeah, this is it, and I wouldn't have gone for something. I was never very impressed by SLP, but cash tokens, as a result of iterating through those previous versions, got to something where at a certain point you do have to pull the trigger on one strong option. And I think I would say that the BCH community has been very happy with it so far. I'd say the ecosystem has started growing.
Here is the deal: like the people you want to convince, I'm not the one that are in the ecosystem. They are the one that are outside, and it's been like a recurring problem with BCH, right? Like where people are like, okay, we pulled the community and we decided that X is better than Y or whatever, right? But what happened when you do that is that you end up with like a smaller and smaller community of people that are very strongly committed to X, right?
Yes and no. Hang on. Let's just be clear about this, right? Because the first problem is you have the internal community splitting, which is what happened with BTC, with BSV, with XEC, and that's destroying network effect. That's expensive. Lost opportunity cost, everything. So you've got to stop that. That's the first thing. And then once you've stopped splitting people off, at least in any great deal, then you can worry about bringing in people from outside. And I think that's where the BCH community is starting to get to now, because over the last, like you said, a lot of those people for various reasons have all left over the years. But in the last 2 to 3 years, I think it's the same solid, consistent people that are part of the ecosystem, and now more people are starting to arrive. Like traction in the Telegram groups is going up. I have listeners writing into the show saying, "Oh, I didn't really consider BCH, but now I'm interested," and so forth. Right. So I think that there's been a phase shift there. But like you said, you can't.
That's good, but I'm not convinced you need to bake token in the consensus rules for that to happen.
I want to hop in real quick.
Like it's a big baggage.
So I've noticed that since the launch of ABLA and cash tokens, we're getting interest from people that feel disenfranchised trying to build anything on BTC. And that is something that I feel like is a new experience. Like it's new that we're
winning converts.
People that are actually investing in this now.
That's very good.
Okay, what about?
I would strongly look at like what are those people's frustration with the BTC ecosystem? I would look at that.
They're fighting for OpCat still, so
yeah, they're still stuck in development hell, like we talked about before the show with the lemmings.
But that's the thing. Like that's the thing where you need to be careful, because you're like, okay, those people, they're fighting with OpCat and whatnot, but this kind of thing kind of exists in BCH now, and you'd be like, okay, we need like even more of code, and like I would be suspicious about even more of code in the same way I would be suspicious about cash token and stuff like that. It's very tempting to build more and more into the consensus.
Yes,
but what you end up at the end of the day when you go that road, like you end up with Dash, right? And so first Dash already exists. So like, and BCH is already above Dash. So if this is if you want to turn BCH into Dash, this is a value losing proposition, right?
Yeah, but I don't think we're doing that. I don't think we're at risk of, like you say, basically feature creep. We just add more and more and more because you think more is better.
I mean, because in
classic
some way,
engineering trap, right?
The people, yeah, but this is something I had to push like constantly when I was there, right? And what essentially happened is like when we left, people added the stuff that they wanted into the consensus, and Cash Token being one of them, and then they got the fuck out. They disappeared.
Well, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, because Cash Token is effectively up group, and you're gonna look at up group, and this is not something that is new. Like it's very
new.
old.
Yeah, I agree that it's an iteration on those previous things, which is actually what gives it confidence. Like you said, that you're pulling the trigger once and you're making a big risky bet. So I think having a lineage of developed solutions that iterated to that point actually adds confidence. But I don't think it's the case.
Yeah, that's better. But I like, here is the thing, like the reason you have value in validation for the native token of the chain is because it is the native token of the chain. Yeah, you don't derive the same security property from validating other tokens. Well, because like first you have to trust the person that emit the token. Like they are never completely trustless to begin with.
Yes. But if you got one of their tokens, you know that you got one of their tokens, and you don't have to do a whole indexer and check the entire history to make sure it wasn't somebody else pretending that they were the guy who issued the token. Right?
Sure, but you get that because the node is doing that.
Yes. But you're already
there is no reason that the token indexer could not be doing that, right? Like it's clearly very possible because the node is doing that. So like really the stuff that you're saying is like we are unable to read you what the ancient, bestowed upon us with the node and the validation of the transaction graph. Like we are unable to reproduce that feat.
Right. Okay. The lost technology, from the previous civilization.
Right? It's like we have technology that came from BTC or whatever. But I made a similar argument in the there was a conference in Australia a few years ago, and
that was a great conference, by the way. I watched a lot of the talks.
Yeah. And
you gave a really great talk at that.
One argument that I made there, and that I believe is true, is like, okay, right now, like, and it was true at the time, and I think it's even more true today. BCH was and still is to, I think, a greater extent, dependent on BTC for its maintenance work, and therefore it's completely irrational to expect. Excuse me. It's completely irrational to expect the price of BCH to be higher than the price of BTC, right? And this whole cash token situation for me is very reminiscent of that. It's like, okay, you have a technology that came from BTC that BCH did not create, and that BCH is to, and that's not just BCH, like we have not been very good on our side to redo it as well, to be honest. But there's nothing magic in that technology, right? It's not like it's doing something that another piece of software could not do. And really, the reason why you want to put it in the consensus rule is because you don't have to redo that feat of technology outside of the consensus rule. And I think it's very damageable because you get all the constraint to have baked that thing in the consensus rule, which is very, very strong, because essentially you want to change things. It's going to be some kind of soft or hard fork, and it's going to be like months of activation and whatnot. You cannot deploy a patch in the indexer, and only the people that use that tech, are impacted, or even a subset of the token or whatnot. But you don't get the benefit because the security property of the token are going to be very different from the native token of the chain. Like you don't get that trustlessness that you get with the consensus rule for the native token. You don't get that for the other tokens. So you pay the cost. You don't really get the benefit outside of implementation.
So if the SLP stuff you think was sufficient, what's your explanation for why cash?
No, I think the implementation was garbage. That's
okay. Okay, so better implementation of SLP, you think would have been enough?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or even like SLP2 or whatever if it's missing feature. But the good stuff is like you can you can do anything, and you don't need to wait on anyone. You don't have like complicated deployment process. Like it's really, really, it's better because like even if it's true that it's the best solution right now, it's not going to be in 10 years, right? Because someone is going to come up with some crazy idea to do a token that do something bizarre, and it's not going to fit. And the only way you're going to get cash token to be able to do this kind of thing is to do a hard fork.
Yes.
And I don't know. I don't think you should want to find yourself in that position, right?
Okay. All right. I can see it. All right. That's enough about CashTokens. I want to ask you about ABLA as well too, because I just noticed on the XEC roadmap, you actually have an item there for an adjustable market-driven, like block size scaling type of technology, right? Which is in the future. Have you taken a look at ABLA? What do you think of that? That was the upgrade this year.
I've not looked at the detail, but in principle, I think it's great, actually. Yeah, not having to do any kind of fork to change the block size. No, I haven't looked at the specific algorithm, but I know like it's actually fairly tricky to get right.
Yes,
because there are all kind of attack scenario that you can think of, but also. We were already working on that before I left the BCH ecosystem. One of the people that was involved was imaginary username. So, he's aware of the issue and stuff like that. So if he was,
he supports ABLA. I can tell you that. He signed off.
No, but you need to, like, the easiest person to fool is yourself, right? So, he would need to be like, he's aware of the different trap. No, he would need to be like sufficiently self-critical. It's not self-critical is not the right word, but like, distrust yourself enough.
Like self-reflective.
To make sure that you don't fall into one of those traps in some stupid way. But yeah, there are many of them, right? Like, so for instance, what if someone mines a series of empty block and the adjustable block size is like very small and the algorithm like doesn't allow to grow it fast enough so that it recovers. But at the same time, if it allows it to grow very fast, then you can have someone stuffing giant blocks for a couple of blocks and suddenly, right? Like it's not impossible, but it's harder than you think to get right, because like most of those algorithms that needs to adapt to a value, it's a very well studied field in especially in robotics and stuff like that, because you have like an arm or something and you want to put it in a specific position and you need to figure out like what input you need to send to the motor. Or, like for cars or stuff like that. So that's like a field in engineering that is extremely well studied, except the part of it that is not so well studied is what do you do when you have like purposefully hostile inputs.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because
they don't
typically that doesn't happen, right? Like nobody is gonna make a shape on the road specifically for the sensor on your car to go crazy, right? Like maybe someone will do it one day, right? But that seems like awfully specific. But in the case of doing that with the block size or like any other parameter, really, like you should expect people in front of their computer to write program to fuck it up, right? So not only you need to do the algorithm that adapt to the value of input in normal modes of operation, but you need to think about like what if someone feeds that algorithm purposefully hostile input, like, and I need to react in a sensible way that's not gonna block legitimate user, but at the same time, it's not going to allow the person that attacks the thing to do too much damage. And that part is very, very difficult. And there is not as much material out there as there is to do this thing right. But in principle, I'm all for it. That's a very good technology. Yeah. And that's
would be interested
as well.
Yeah, I'll be interested to hear your review when you take time to look at it and find the specifics, whether you think it was a good job or not. Okay, so CashTokens, thumbs down from you. ABLA, thumbs up. The next ones are...
and you're going to remark, right? Like there is a guideline behind those stuff. It's like ABLA is something like you change it once in the consensus and then, you can forget about it and move on to the next thing, right? That's something that actually alleviate the work at the consensus level, whereas cash token is the exact opposite. And really, like as much as possible, you want to remove stuff from the consensus layer. Okay. The more you have in there, the worse spot you're in.
Yeah, I don't know that I agree with that. But anyway, then we've got the VM limits is probably the next ones maybe coming up. And then also UTXO commitments is kind of floating around in the zeitgeist. I believe UTXO commitments also on the XEC roadmap, right? So
it's something that we want to do. Yeah,
fan of that.
I'm a fan of that, though. We are not really at the scale where it's a huge problem, and BCH isn't either.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So this is something I would not rush in, especially since it's still a field of very active research, and like the data structure that you need to use, like those are like cryptographic data structure. Right now, there isn't one that have all the property that you wouldn't want the UTXO commitment to have. And some of them are pretty good for some use case and not so good from some others. But because it's still a field of active research, I would not be too quick to pick one and go along with it at this time.
What else is on the XEC immediate roadmap that you're working on?
I think one of the very cool stuff is a thing that we call Heartbeat. It's quite funny because the original, not the original ID, but the original mass for the thing come from Tom Harding, which is, I don't know if he's still involved in the BCH ecosystem, but he was at the time. And we were not exactly friends, but on that one, like the mass of the mass, right? Like they are correct no matter who write them. And so Tom Harding had this idea for real-time targeting. And I don't know if you guys have read the paper or aware of the idea or whatnot, but basically real-time targeting is you choose the difficulty based on the clock, right? And it's not like a fixed difficulty for the next block. It's like, if the previous block was found like 1 minute ago, the difficulty would be very high. But if it was found like 20 minutes ago, the difficulty would be very low, in such a way that you would get something that is much closer to one block every 10 minutes rather than, like what we're right now. It's like sometimes it's like in 5 minutes you have 3 blocks, and then for like half an hour you have no blocks and so on, right? Which is... the process is random, right? So that's expected. You have a bunch of variation in there, but that leads to various. So first, that leads to user experience that is not always so good, right? Because sometimes you are going to wait like half an hour or whatnot for a transaction, which is not great. But also, it's counterintuitive with BA for people, because if you have one block on average every 10 minutes, you would expect that, on average, my transaction is going to confirm in 5 minutes, right? But no, it actually confirms on average in 10 minutes still.
Yeah.
And that's, that's something that defies the intuition. Like, how can you have a block every 10 minutes and I'm sending the transaction between the blocks?
Halfway, it's still 10 minutes.
Right? On average, it should be
an expected time
between 2 blocks, and it's still 10 minutes, right?
There's no progress. You don't make progress. Yes.
Yeah, and the intuition behind it, something that helps me is like, if you imagine a bus that goes to the bus every 10 minutes, right? And you go to the station, well, the next bus is going to be on average every 5 minutes. But no, let's imagine you have like, for the first 10 minutes of the hour, you have like 5 bus. And then you have like the next one that is, in 45 minutes or something like that. Well, now you come to the bus stop at any time. The chances that you are in that 45 minutes time span are very high, and the chances that you are like within the 10 minutes where there is one bus every minute is pretty low, right? So on average, you are gonna wait a much longer time even though that on average there is a bus every 10 minutes, right? And it's the same for blocks. And so obviously the problem with real-time targeting is that everybody has a different clock, right? And even if everybody had the same clock, the block takes time to propagate on the network. So nobody's going to receive it at the same time. So, at the end of the day, you cannot really use that. At least you cannot use that, standalone by itself. But we're doing a thing that we call Heartbeat, and it's called Heartbeat because, we want like more regular block. I think it's a good name. I like it. So we want the chain to have more of a heartbeat rather than a constant heart attack. And so the way you do that is like you have the regular difficulty adjustment, but if blocks come too fast, you can use real-time targeting to make them harder, which means that, you reduce the cases of like very fast block. But as a result, you also reduce the cases of very long block because those very fast block are not going to ramp up the difficulty, causing the very long block later. And we can do that because we have pre-consensus on which we can make decision based on subjective characteristics, right?
Okay.
Because some nodes are going to be like, okay, for me it's okay, or for me this block is coming too fast, I don't want that. And then, the node can vote it against each other and make a decision for the network as a whole. So I don't know. I think I'm quite excited about that one. And de facto, it's pretty strange, but you divide by more than 2 the average confirmation time when you do that. Theoretically, you would divide it by 2 if you were on BTC, but BCH and XEC have lower hash rate than BTC compared to BTC. And as a result, they have higher variance. So actually, average confirmation time on both BCH and XEC is more than 10 minutes. Like if you have like all the hash on BTC constantly, or on BCH or XEC or whatever. Like if you have all the hash on the chain constantly, you would expect the average confirmation time for a transaction to be 10 minutes. But as soon as you have hash that switch back and forth, it actually gets worse than that, which is like even more mind-boggling, right? Because now you have like 1 block every 10 minutes, and yet you have an average confirmation time that is more than 10 minutes. But that effectively would bring it down to 5 minutes. So that's dividing between like 2 and 3 the average confirmation time. So that's, I think, pretty good user experience improvement.
Okay.
Though you would not be able to port that on BCH, at least as it is. You would need something akin to pre-consensus before as a stepping stone to be able to do this kind of stuff.
Yeah, like you say about developing and porting things across. How much? We've got a bit of a sense, I'd say, from your answers about ABLA and CashTokens, but how much do you follow the BCH tech dev or BTC or any other coins? Where do you get the inspiration for your stuff, or do you just cook it up yourself?
So I follow what BCH is doing from time to time, but not that much, except recently because when I was announced to go on the podcast and a bunch of people came to me and I was like, okay, have you looked at that on BCH and this and that, and here is what's going on. So lately I've been paying attention quite a bit because of that, but usually not that much. I'm not completely ignoring it, but also, my main focus is more XEC than BCH. No, generally we hash it out between each other and try to find good solution, and generally try to find solutions that are more than the sum of the parts. That's usually a very strong indicator that you're moving in the right direction. It's like, okay, you can do pre-consensus, for instance, and out of that you get protection against 51% attack, and you get you can get like instant confirmation, like exchange accept XEC transaction, for instance, with 1 block confirmation, because they know once the block is finalized, it's not going to be reorged, this kind of stuff. So you get, you get some benefit out of that. But then you're like, okay, if we have that, then we can build something like Heartbeat on top of it. When you can do this kind of thing, when things compound, rather than adding like several channels that increase the complexity quite a bit. When you have that, that's usually a very strong indicator that you're providing something that is cohesive as a whole. That's not going to explode in complexity, and that's a big guiding principle. And obviously, the second big guiding principle would be like, what is the problem that users are facing. And for that, we're actually not just looking into the exec ecosystem, we're looking wider because, you want to look at the problem that are at your level, but also at the level above, right? Because you don't want to be like going in one direction and then realize that you should have been going in the other direction. And it's quite funny because it gives us, we talked about that a bit earlier, but it gives us stuff where we've built the indexer into the node, for instance, and now we have like other chain that are interested in that. And like quite ironically, BCH, it's used on BCH. Even though we are evil and destroying everything, and thankfully we've been kicked out. But that's good. Like when that happened, that's also a good sign that we're solving some fundamental problem that exists in the place, and not because sometimes you can also create problem for yourself and solve them, and then you think you've made progress, but
it's just you going in a loop. You're just on your own. Yes, yeah. And how do you feel about the XEC ecosystem overall? Like, I just wondered if you could speak a little bit to, firstly, obviously the market cap, but everything else too. How is adoption going? Like you said, you've rebranded. You didn't have all that attention or history, even though you do, but it's not going to be obvious to people, right? Mm-hmm. And rebuilding everything from scratch after nearly 4 years compared to what you thought maybe at the time when everything split and you were sort of working on your own direction. Again, I guess, ironically, things come in cycles, right? You never know. Maybe you have a group of people want to kick you out of XEC before too long. But anyway, how do you feel it is now?
It doesn't look that way. I think it's in a pretty good position considering like the history and everything. Like contrary to BCH, we started from scratch essentially, right? With no network effect, no integration, no nothing. So I think it's a pretty good achievement that we are where we are. Even though like we're not one of the top coin, but starting from nothing, I think it's pretty good. So I'm pretty happy from a text perspective. I think we are doing. I don't know. I think we're doing one of the best stuff in the space from, but obviously I'm going to be biased, but I think we're like, most coins out there, they're going variation of the same thing, right? And we're really building something unique that I think has true value. So I'm pretty happy about that. Obviously, I would have preferred to do some of those stuff on BCH because it's kind of stupid to have like one coin that have the brand recognition and market penetration, and then doesn't do the right tech stuff, and the coin that do the right thing from the text perspective, but doesn't have the same market penetration, brand recognition, all of that. To me, it's a bit disappointing that we're where we are, but you can choose. So no, I'm pretty happy about that. I wanted to say something else, but there's some evolution of the exec ecosystem that I didn't really predict, but in insight are rather obvious. Like for instance, we are more reliant on proof of stake than I would have made it myself, right? But in Insight, it's a bit obvious, right? Because all the people that were diehard proof of work, they kind of stayed with BCH, and the people that were open to proof of stake, right? So if we had done those stuff within BCH, I think we would be less reliant on proof of stake, like some choice, some cursor would have been put in different places. And I think I would have preferred that personally, but you also, you need to adapt with what the community and the ecosystem, wants. So we're a bit more proof of stake than I would have think that we would be. But nothing I would not stand behind, right? Like that's not how I would have made it if it was just me from scratch. But I don't think we made like anything that is, like horrible that I would not stand behind.
Amazing. You said before, you mentioned the talk that you gave at Townsville, right? And one of the things that you said in that talk was you talked about, you had a slide with Mel Gibson. I don't know if you remember, from Braveheart. And it was kind of about like, okay, we can't take over BTC if we're just like copying their stuff. And it's the same with the coins. Like if you have all your money stashed in BTC, but then you're like, we're going to flip them with BCH, you've set the incentives against yourself, right? You've got to be, as a leader.
Yeah. We had various people in the space at the time that were like committed to BTC and not BCH.
Yes.
And I always thought that it was not such a great idea for people in the BCH ecosystem to choose people that would pick BTC or BCH as key opinion leaders. But the thing is, like leaders, especially in an ecosystem that is decentralized, you cannot pick leaders. Like people, like followers make leaders, right? In that kind of ecosystem. Yeah. So people follow whatever they want. But I wanted to warn about that, and I think that's. That's something that would be true in any ecosystem, right? If you have people that are invested in the competitor more than the stuff that they represent, if push comes to shove, they're going to make the choice that is not going to bankrupt them.
But this is what I was going to ask, right? Is then, have you considered just selling all your BCH to like align with that philosophy then?
I've not kept all my BCH, but I've kept most of them. I don't think BCH is, fulfilling its potential. So why would I set BCH as the benchmark? It does not make sense. I think I've not sold any exec ever as well. It's not like I'm picking BCH over eCash. Yes. Actually, I've sold some BCH for exec, but I've still have a large amount of BCH.
You could sell it all, right? If it's interesting. I'm just trying.
Well, but there's still a bit in me that hope that BCH is going to get its shit together and fulfill its potential.
Yes. Well, I hope we can live up to that. Truly, even if it might not have been the way you would have done it, I think the way the community is going now, at least it might.
But here is the deal, though. Like, if BCH doesn't do it the way I think it should, it's not a problem. Actually, once, I don't know, maybe it's going to be sound a bit pretentious, but once you reach some level of success, actually, you find people that are going to be essentially a yes men or rebels, but yes. It's very hard to find people that's going to give you honest feedback, Yes. And so it already happened somewhat at my level, though probably not as critical as it happens, for, I don't know, someone like Elon Musk or whoever, right? But clearly not at that level. But it already happened somewhat at my level. And so one thing I've picked up over the year that is a very strong indicator that you are dealing with someone that's going to be willing to, interact with you in the right way, not overly positive, overly negative, yes. But, being actually honest. Like when you do something good, they're going to tell you do something good. But when you fuck it up, they're going to tell you as well. I lost my train of thought.
Well, this is about, should you just dump all your BCH and go in on all?
No, yeah, so one of the things is like they are going to present you solution in area where they are somewhat expert. They're gonna present you solution that are like not yours, but they're gonna be like, okay, here is we should do it or whatever. Yes. And quite often they're gonna be better than your solution. Then once it's the case, that you're dealing with someone that is like first quite transparent and honest in its communication, but also competent. So typically those are gonna be the people I seek out to work with. So if BCH does that as an ecosystem, then, I'm very happy.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. All right. Well, we're already a little bit over time, and I think we'll save some of the other stuff. We can always address that on another show, but we always have a last segment called Message to the Community, which is your opportunity to just talk to the BCH community and tell them from your point of view, whatever they need to hear. Obviously, we've heard a bit of that throughout the show, but if you want to add in a final last thoughts or wrap it up or anything, here's your chance.
I kind of feel like I've been doing that for the past 2 hours or so.
Yes.
But if I would have to sum it up, it's like, people in the BCH ecosystem, you have gold in your hands, you have a project that have stuff that most projects in the ecosystem don't have. and that are very difficult to get, and that we were able to get, when we launched and started to develop the project. But you need to start operating at that level, right? Because if you don't, then they're not sufficient by themselves. They give you tremendous potential that other projects don't have, but you need to start operating at that level. And that means that you're gonna have to listen to people that tell you, corporate stuff that are maybe not as fun as hacking, some indexer on the weekend or whatever. But that's the thing that you need to bring BCH to the same level. And the alternative is just slow drift, little by little, losing some mind share and probably market share, but especially mind share little by little every year. But that would be a shame.
Yes. No, very sobering, and I think very accurate. And I think that's a challenge that's beholden on everyone in the BCH ecosystem. Definitely. All right, we've got our final slide here with our supporter appreciation. Thank you to our donators, as always. Love you very much. Thank you to our patrons, Ricky and HP. Thank you to our sponsor, General Protocols. Check out BCH Bull. And our FundMe is running, like I mentioned at the start. You can check it out at FundMe.Cash. We've already got some contributions from Majamalu, 2024.bcharg.com, Molecular, Erdogan Talk, Peter Wooler, who put in the message, I think that goal should be and can realistically be everyone simultaneously having on-chain funds. So for people who don't know, this is a bit of a troll because this guy is one of the BTC devs, and I assume this is a quote he said somewhere, and in the meantime, he's busy sabotaging BTC from ever doing that. So,
but I don't think Peter really is very active.
He was not one of those. Okay, all right. Well, anyway, somebody getting a troll in there. Emergent reasons, stay grounded, stay awesome, PDP, electronic cash for the worlds, cash stamps, biggest soundboard for BCH we have. Keep up the great job, guys. Yeah, beer. Try to get Vlad Costea on one of these next episodes. Would be a great discussion as he's opening up. I think this is interesting. You had a chat with him fairly recently-ish. My hesitation.
To me, it's come a bit of the nowhere in the space, and you have grown quite a bit. And I think he asked the right question. Someone he can be a bit going in many directions, and but he has the enthusiasm of a newcomer, and he has the right question. So I think it's probably someone you want to follow and talk to.
Okay. All right, maybe. My hesitation or my reasoning, I'm happy to talk to almost anyone, but the reason in his case that I'm not, going out there trying to make it happen is because I've been very critical of him on Twitter, and I would say rightly so, because he's still in the unplugging process, essentially, from the whole BTC hoax and all that. He's kind of got it now, and now he's talking about Litecoin, and he's talking about Monero, he's talking about all this other stuff, but he still is refusing to acknowledge or really give any credit to BCH, despite the fact that now a lot of what he's saying is what people from the BCH camps have been telling him forever. So that's not necessarily a problem. That's just part of his journey. And I'm sure over time he'll get to the point that he can. But it means that now is not really the best time to talk to him, because if we did, it would just be, him refusing to acknowledge all that stuff. Whereas once he gets over that bridge, then it would be quite a productive time to talk to him, because he can reflect on the journey and maybe have some more insights. But he needs a little longer to have a few realizations, I think, before we'd be able to get the best interview out of him. So that's my reasoning. Anybody who's wondering. So Vlad, if you want to come on the show, all you got to do is just capitulate on some of your cognitive dissonance, and then we'll see. We'll see at that point. All right, we've got the start guide, FAQ, and links at bitcoincashpodcast.com. If you're new, listen to episode 85. Amaury was actually mentioned in that. I don't know, maybe you can watch it too, find out what was said. Celine Wallet at celine.cash. And final shout outs. Amaury, you're first up.
So first, if that interests you, go see the XEC ecosystem, so e.cash, and, there are a bunch of links there. Otherwise, you may want to have a read. So I saw that you had Devon Eriksen in a show recently.
Yes.
I read his book, and I think you should. It's a really good book if you're interested in like crypto, but also like liberty in general. Because the book takes place in space, but not not Star Wars, like quite realistic actually. Like we could be in 50 years or something like that if technology develops very well, and like as a result, many traditional law enforcement and stuff like that don't quite work the way they should. So it's a very interesting thought experiment into like what happened is in much more self-directed environment. So people that are interested in freedom and crypto and all of that, I think would find it interesting and enjoying. And personally, I don't know, like more and more we have entertainment that just like tried to push a message, and this one did not. So I really enjoyed that. Anyway,
we had Christina in the YouTube comments asking us to ask you what your favorite book that you've read recently was. So I hope she sees this clip.
So yeah, recently that would be that in fiction, and in non-fiction that would be The Psychology of Money. I would say very, very interesting as well.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That episode we had some technical difficulties, so it hasn't been released yet or been live.
Okay.
But it will be. It will be soon, and people can look forward to that. It was actually quite interesting because usually we're talking in the BCH ecosystem, it's all very internally focused, but he brought a lot of perspective that was from outside all of that actually. So I think the listeners will find it really interesting. And yeah, Theft of Fire is the book, and you can go and buy an NFT, a cash token on TapSwap if you want, which is a pirate permit. So then you can just pirate his book, and I mean he can't stop you either way. But he was just like, well, then that's one way you can support us in a more sort of BCH friendly way. So you can check that out if you're interested too. Jett, any shout outs for this week?
This has been a great conversation. This has actually been much better than I expected. And I know that part of it is just like...
So if I may, what did you expect?
Yeah, exactly.
I want to know now.
So I don't have like a specific example, but I was expecting there to be a lot more, I guess, disagreements. Like I expected it to be a little more heated than it was. Like you guys got along well, fantastically. And that was,
I'm a big fan. I've been for a long time. That's why I tell you it's the truth.
And I was also expecting you to kind of, I guess, be more of a hater. Like more, I expected it to be less technical and more of, like the BitChevex kind of conversation coming up again. And this was nice.
But most of the BitChevex are gone now, so a few of them remain, but most of them they are gone.
Yeah, that's fair. And then the second shout out would be to Devon and like Sarah and Christine, because that was a fantastic conversation as well.
Brilliant. And my shout out goes to Bitcoin Jason, the absolute legend, has started himself up his own podcast. The Bitcoin Jason podcast has got episode 1 with Jomar from Paytaka. So you can all go check that out. I was very pleased to see that he had been somewhat inspired by me, he said, to start that. And it's great to see the ecosystem growing. And like we've talked about on this show, it's really important for our credibility and our public messaging that we've got more and more promotion by people who are really genuine and authentic, and here's all of that. And so I highly recommend everyone to go and listen to that. If you've been listening to the show, I'm sure you'll love it. I can never get enough BCH content myself. So that's been excellent. And yeah, thanks, Amaury, for coming on. It's been a long time in the works, but we got there in the end. And yeah, maybe in a little while we can check back in, see how things played out.
Okay, yeah, no problem.
Cash tokens might be, a huge success, or it might be a huge failure. Like we can always see. Anyway, the erstwhile child BCH. I just love that. That's such a good framing of it. Anyway, all right, that's it. Thank you all for listening. Until next time.
Ciao.
Reports that more than 500,000 Iraqi children have died as a direct result of U.S. sanctions. It's not just theoretical. These are real people with real lives. 500,000 kids? I'm sorry for shouting, but it just disgusts me what these people in government do. And they do it through central banking and through the control of the money supply, and Bitcoin takes that away from them.
This is the sound of freedom coming out your speakers. Are they playing hide and seek or finders keepers? Let me define my thesis. While they treasonous deep in the malfeasance, a grand deception, 1,000 reasons, keeping the truth out of our reach, the powers that be. No morale for peace, just war when there's mouths to feed, covering mouths when they're trying to breathe. The silence that speaks volumes, now the blind can see. See, they lie and deceive, divide and conquer minds when they try to perceive what's behind the curtains that eyes can't see. Incentivized greed, desensitized breeds, gentrified streets, keeping money centralized leads to total control, to keep a hold of your soul, so you don't own but you owe. On the verge of homeless and thrown in a hole. They really think it's all a game, I can only console and say the rain is over, there's nowhere to go. So